Okay, so one thing we definitely cannot forget to do is thank Robin Bell, who edited this film for us and who basically saved our lives when we were trying to organize this entire conference and edit a film about the last 5 years somehow in 20 minutes. Thank you, Robin, for saving us. So now it is very much my pleasure to welcome Paul Mason, who has joined us here today and who we're very excited to have because he brings together several areas of expertise that are very important to us and to understanding, we think, the uprisings of the last few years. He's written 4 books, one of which explored the history of the global labor struggles, labor movements, and bringing those in connection with contemporary labor struggles in a way that was very eloquently connected. The stories from history brought into the contemporary moment to help us make sense of where we are now. How can we understand the movements that we encounter, the experiences that we have today in relation to a very long history of social movement organizing, of labor organizing. So that is one source of inspiration. A second reason is he's also written a book on crisis and the economic crisis, and explaining how and where the crisis comes from and how that is affecting us today as well. And the final reason, and the real reason that we were very much inspired by his work, is his latest book, Why It's Still, or Why It's Kicking Off Everywhere, but the latest version is called Why It's Still Kicking Off Everywhere, which I imagine will be the focus of his presentation this evening, which he has followed over the past few years, many of the uprisings that have happened around the world, and I think we will hear a very exciting talk from that perspective this evening. So thank you very much. With no further ado, I would like to welcome Paul Mason.
Thank you for that, and what a brilliant film. It means that the first part of what I wanted to do, I don't have to do, which is to convince you that all these risings are linked. It's the first tenet of the belief of the mainstream media that none of them are linked, that they've got nothing in common whatsoever. I generally disapprove of a white guy talking to a bunch of people who 20 years younger, who risked life and limb in those situations. I think the choreography of it, even when it's Zizek or Chomsky, is poor. Yeah? The only reason for doing it is if I can, in half an hour, provoke and polarize and focus the debate that you will have this weekend with some of them, with a kind of godlike knowledge, because I've been to many of those situations, not all of them, and also a historical experience, not as long as yours, sir, but an experience that goes back to the late 70s in Britain, living through what was at the time the height of the labour movement struggles there. I'm going to start by showing you some more video if this works, but this time I want you to watch it analytically, as I had to as a journalist. This is Greece on the June 26th, 2011, and it's just a riot, but this scene sticks in my mind for the sociology of it. This is the day of the Greek bailout, and what you can see is not just people like you or young people in general. You've got shopkeepers, you've got old guys, most people not covering their faces. And it was seeing that, everything you see is shot by me today. It's seeing this happen convinced me that the Greek crisis had gone into a new phase. So that what we had there in that scene, those of you who are Greek, you know that street there off the Plaka, you had shopkeepers, you had civil society, not the whole of civil society, but everybody except, a very few people, rising. And I think when we look at catalogues of violence and repression and uprising, as you've just shown us, for me the important question is, when does it reach that scale? Because when it reaches the scale of the whole of a street coming out, as they did there, you can call the event a revolution. And if I want to say one controversial thing now, it is that what you've seen in Marianne and Brandon's film there, and what we are living through, is a revolution. But it's a revolution of a kind that is very different from the 1848, and certainly very different from 1917, or anything we saw in the 20th century. Because revolution in a highly complex and information-driven society just feels very mental. Instead of going, as in 1848 or as in the 60s, from theory to action, it keeps going from theory to action, and when repression happens, people can go quite back, not so much to theory, but to thought, to mental and cultural opposition, rather than continually staying on the streets. Those of you from Egypt, also the Tunisian people who were supposed to be here, didn't get their visas, would be able to tell us over the weekend what it feels like to constantly have to go from, as it were, a bed of critical thinking into action and then back. I think that is a new dynamic. And the reason for it is, of course, because while they can repress action, not only can't they repress thought, but as I'll try to argue, we have more power over the dissemination of thought, ideas and culture than any previous generation that ever tried to make a revolution. Let me show you a picture of what this means for the dynamic of the struggles going forward. Okay. Does anybody use this? Anybody? Do we have any engineers in the room? Okay, this is a screen from a program called CATIA. And it looks like, when you go to a modern manufacturing plant, an advanced manufacturing facility, you see lots of men, mainly men, also women, sitting at computers working on screens that look like that. It looks like that's an aircraft. A bit of an aircraft. It looks like what they're doing is designing it in 3D, and indeed they are, but they're doing much more. Decisively, what you can do now is, once you've designed it, you can virtually manufacture it. So that is a picture of a virtually manufactured bit of a Boeing. What I mean is, on the mainframe, you can take the brass screw and an aluminium strut and a piece of carbon fibre, put them together and into a wing, and each behaves all the time as it should do in reality. You take it and you fly the wing and you watch what happens to the carbon strut and the aluminium strut and the brass screw as it lands on a computer. And you do that about 186 million times before you try and make the plane. Now, this is why we've lived through a revolution in manufacturing in the last 25 years. Because what that means is, and I bet you didn't expect to see one of these graphs, but it has a relevant. What it means is that all the changes take place in the mental space. This is where it starts being built, and this is over the wall, as it was called, design on one side of the wall, build on the other side of the wall. That's what happened. This is supplied to me by a guy who does it. That's what happened. All the changes and all the costs were in the factory. Now, with IT and distributed networks and supercomputers, all the trouble happens in the design stage. And I thought that was a very interesting metaphor for the revolution we might be living through. Because if it is, it means that a lot of the stuff that we are doing in this mental phase, or this repeated retreat to the discussion circle, the conference, the cultural event, the General Assembly, is akin to that. It's very useful. Because it means, come back. Go back. It means that when we get that, this is like the Russian Revolution. This is lots of mistakes happening in real time. And this is worth doing, thinking things through and occupying the mental space. So, I'm going to talk you through some pictures of the events. These are mainly still pictures. and talk about them, sort of give you kind of a read back of what I think about when I think about what is happening. So what's driving the revolution is, and what is driving people's preparedness to do this? This is on the third night of Taksim Square. It's that avenue that leads to the presidential palace near the Besiktas Stadium. Those of you who are from Istanbul, I can't say it right. And people were always doing what he did, which is standing up and trying to talk to their friends 100 yards away, saying, come, come, come. That's right at the front. And what gives people the power to do that, I think, is three things. The economic narrative, as you said in your film, of the last 25 years is over. It's ended. It has no relevance. It has no coherence. They may be sticking to it, but it's gone. Most people can see it's gone. Many people are living through the destruction of their lives because they had based their entire life plans on the neoliberal economic project, and it's gone. This too is not far away. And you saw some of the footage of people doing that. That is an amazing cross-section of society, of Turkish society, doing that. Most people not covering their faces, no police around for 4 or 5 days in the beginning of the Taksim and Gezi occupations. So, the first thing is economic. The second thing is, of course, technology. Technology has allowed us to circumvent the means of monopolizing information. You saw it in the Egyptian revolution with Egyptian TV. You saw it and with Facebook. You saw it in every one of these risings. It is important that this glow of the face that you see, the thing that makes that woman's face glow, is her smartphone, and it is doing something useful. And the third thing is economics, technology. I think a new kind of person. You know you're in a revolution when new kinds of human beings with new kinds of values emerge and look and sound and act very differently than their parents' generation. I think that's what we're going through as well. Such people, strength, this is Occupy London Stock Exchange on day one. The strength, I think, of them is that their protests embody and express core values that make people want to reshape the world like this. It's been said that a weakness is that they have no strategy or no demands. I think it can be, having lived as a leftist during the days of rise and decline of workers' struggles in Britain and decline of the left, I think it can be a strength not to have a hierarchy or demands or engagement or indeed a strategy. But you have to recognize what it does. That's a photograph from the same day. The day London Stock Exchange was nearly occupied is the day that Julian turned up. And, you know, whatever you think of, however good you think that what Assange and WikiLeaks have done, it was, people were visibly cringing at their own reaction. There was a problem about who set the agenda. The media only wanted to speak to him. He made a short speech. He was very respectful for them. But not having demands and leaders sometimes doesn't stop you ending up with quite skewed demands and leaders. And I think that's one of the problems I've observed activists trying to grapple with in terms of that. And the other thing it does is not having an agreed and coherent project. I think human beings do want sometimes to cohere and agree on one thing, and the one thing that we can nearly all agree on who are involved in these struggles is how horrible and how unjustified repression can be. And this is just a photo I took in this jail in Phoenix, Arizona, where they put migrants. As you can see, it's tense, and as you can also see, they make them dress like that. And you can't see that the temperature is 114 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's what you do. And the reason I was taking the photograph inside there is that for the sheriff of Phoenix, Arizona, every journalist who visits is good. They want to humiliate the people inside. They want everybody in Mexico and El Salvador to see these scenes. Does it make you annoyed? Yes, it does. There are some of the women in those tents, in mainly for migration and drug offences. So that's repression. We can all agree is unconscionable and annoying and makes you angry. But I think one of the problems is that the sort of ability to get annoyed with the cops, or indeed to cheer at as you did in the previous session, the odd Molotov cocktail going in, does mean that sometimes the debate doesn't go any further. It kind of lets off steam to be against the repression. Now, I'm going to come back to where I think that takes us. Because being against repression has been the easy bit of a radical movement for the last 200 years. The hard bit has been winning. And not hardly any, except possibly the Brazilian struggle in the last period, has really won. What can we talk about going forward? I just thought I'd throw another picture in of the Turkish barricade building, because I think it was so striking of, if you wanted to do amateur sociology, the side-by-side nature of formerly rival football fans, the gender mix, the age mix, the class mix, actually, even at that stage, quite interesting. And we'll talk a bit in a minute about the mix of classes we get in these protests. I couldn't put better what is going on there than Clay Shirky does in Here Comes Everybody. This is a quote from Clay Shirky's book, which was written before any of this happened, and meant to be talking about, effectively ways to use the internet to find your lost mobile phone. That's what, it's not just about that. But basically, Shirky's insight that the barriers to group action collapse when you have access to networks that you can avoid the state and a centralized authority controlling. That's the central thing, and therefore we're all free to gather together, act, swarm, hit a target, move away from a target, move back, disagree, and move on. We were speaking earlier about the Dutch resistance. Almost the first act of it was a general strike in February 1941. But that is from a world where you had to really get together, where organisation and permanence and coherence was really important, or you couldn't do anything. The first resistance movements here and everywhere else were small and had to be hierarchical because you couldn't do anything in any other way. Now, we're the first generation probably ever in human history, and certainly in capitalist history, where that statement is really true. So what does it mean? I think this is a protest in Seville against Caja Madrid, against the banks. And I always remember when I interviewed this woman saying to her, because she was doing this play acting about being married to the banks, and the state is married to the banks. And I said, it's really great you've got that veil to wear. She said, well, this is my veil. This is what I was married in. And it brought home the reality. People are bringing their real lives in. These are not just gestures. Okay, but I think what we lack, what this movement lacks, is an answer to how capitalism becomes something better than capitalism, how a carbon-burning economy becomes something better, a non-carbon burning economy, and how a society based on women's oppression moves beyond women's oppression. This is a picture of some of the women who occupied this block of flats in Seville. And again, possibly activists from the kind of global movement were like 5%. They were the kind of catalyst. They did some of the helping. They did some of the breaking into the original flats. But what we are seeing is a movement, is ordinary people adopting spontaneously things that were only gestures 10 years ago for an educated, almost, I wouldn't say the elite of protesters, but an educated group of protesters. That is just one example of the way horizontal and spontaneous and low-level action is taking place all over the world in response to the crisis. I think the first thing is we need to get our heads around what the time scale is of what we're going through. The death of an economic model happens about once every 50 years, sometimes quicker. I know Paul Mattick will be probably talking about that. He talks about it in the film. So a 50-year event is the death of an economic model. The rise of new kind of people with new technologies to make protest much harder to repress and much more effective than in the, I would argue, than in the hierarchical 20th century is a big event. It could be, if you look at the way the historian Elizabeth Eisenstein writes about the printing press as being a 500-year event that sets the tone for 500 years of capitalist development in terms of information hierarchies, then what we are going through in terms of the network and information technology, I would argue, is probably a 500-year event. And the reason I've got this picture up here, which is in Madrid, when Merkel was visiting, this is just a picture I took on the picket of Merkel, is I think we just have to remember and pinch ourselves a bit when we get worried about the scale of change we live through, that the empowerment of women, the seizure by women over their control of their own reproductive apparatus is a 40,000 year event. It is a massive event. And we are living through it. I've covered in Britain the rape controversies on Twitter, so the rape trials on Twitter. And whenever I get to speak to these idiots who do these threats, the first thing I always like to say to them is, you're going through it. I'm not surprised you're angry. You're living through a 40,000 year event, but it's only one way. It doesn't reverse. Get used to it. And the reason I say that is because I think sometimes people in this room, even people in this room, the activists, can be overawed by the scale of what's happening. Is it really true that we're living through the death of neoliberalism? Can it really be true? Can it really be true that we are living through an event technologically bigger or as big as the invention of the printing press, which changes the way people think and act and relate, and culture and relationships? Well, yes, it can, because we've already lived through tangibly a no going back era of women's reproductive empowerment, and I just think it gives it scale. What's happening here? So, what is the narrative? What is the narrative I would suggest that the movement has to sort of focus on? I think there are three economic facts that you could spend a long time and a big bibliography establishing, but they're pretty provable, and they are the ones I've just put up. Capitalism has produced the means progressively to eradicate the need to work. Even in the 1960s, workers, when you surveyed them, the New Left surveyed workers in the 60s with their new attitudes. One of the words that kept coming up was absurd. Work is absurd, because when you stand at the side of a machine and you don't act on it, simply mind it, it's already absurd. But if you think back to what I showed you before, and you think back to the way things are now manufactured, and what technology does, really, we're in a situation where labour is progressively expelled from the process of production, and the process of production takes up maybe 15–20% of the world's economic activity in a developed country. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that information goods are destroying market mechanisms. This is like a big problem for mainstream economics. Anybody with an MP3 player, anybody with Spotify, anybody who's ever ripped a CD, you know what I mean. It is hard to make the market work when there's no scarcity. And in information goods, there are no scarcity. And if you think back to the thing I showed you, the picture of the plane, that's partly an information good. It's only partly physical. So information, the dynamics of the destruction of market forces are happening before us. This is why we are living through massive change. And the final thing is, collaborative production has begun. Wikipedia, I know everybody talks about Wikipedia, and then simultaneously it's banned from use in universities, but to me it is the wonder of the world. The Encyclopaedia Britannica had 19,000 authors at the point where it went bust. 18,000 of them were already dead. Wikipedia has about 27,000 regular authors and maybe 80 or 90,000, maybe more now, irregular authors. The point is, even if you gave the cleverest capitalist interest-free capital forever, they could not create something as good as Wikipedia. They just couldn't. And what is more, if they tried, Wikipedia would outcompete them. Wikipedia would destroy them as it's destroyed Encarta and Encyclopedia Britannica. The collaborative is driving out the commercial wherever it is allowed. So you are living through a massive change that's happening irrespective of your Molotovs and your balaclavas and your kafirs. It is happening, but you are going to be the ones who decide what the outcome of it is. And that is the amazing thing. Right, cutting to the chase. Who knows what that is? Come on, own up. It's Skyrim. Okay, now I was thinking of a way of starting a discussion with activists about what do you have if you don't have a program, if you don't have a strategy. Because what I've just said there, what I've tried to describe is the economic reality that you have to ride in a way. You kind of ride it, sadly, in the same way that Bolsheviks and anarchists in the first half of the 20th century had to ride the statization of society. They had to do something about it. They had to react to it, use it positively or resist it. Now you have to react to the basic economic facts of your time. And the only analogy I could come up with for something I thought might work that isn't a strategy or not a program or not a set of tactics or a hierarchy is what happens in a video game. Because in a video game, like this is it, you're this guy here, you're the hero, and you're fighting the villains. What happens is the game itself is a story. It's like a narrative. Whatever you do, whichever kingdom you visit to do your quest, you know that it's always possible to win the game. So, in other words, I'm not saying do it like a computer game. Is think of the way computer games create narratives that are neither strategies nor simply, unfocused action. It is a framework. And I suppose the other brilliant thing about Skyrim is you always have an alliance. There's always somebody who looks like a lizard, somebody who looks like a human being, somebody who looks like a cat, or there are more alliances. In the end, you can always kill the dragon. Here's what I mean by this in reality. Look, this is Somonte in Andalusia, and it's an anarchist-run, collaboratively run farm with Che Guevara as a flag. That's there. Che gets allowed even in anarchist farms. He's even on the T-shirt of the shepherd. This is the only Guevarist shepherd I found in Andalusia. But these are doing the real thing. This is the real deal. It's an organic farm, and these guys sleep on a concrete floor, and they eat lettuce sandwiches, and that's their life. But it is real. It is, in other words, a small act that is neither a gesture nor a strategy. It is a living thing that they are doing as part of another series of linked living things that produces an outcome. And to me, that is part of what I think is working in the strategy of this movement. No press people, apart from me, often turn up. They do it whether the press are there or not, and the stuff grows. It is small scale, but it is neither protest nor simply reform. It's something in the between. I suppose you could call it is living despite capitalism, but it's also energizing people to a much higher extent than simply resisting. The alliance that has made these protests consists far more today of three sorts of people. In our era, in the 20th century, in the era of the Dutch resistance, in the era of the 1970 strikes in Britain, there were two sides: workers, capitalists. students had to decide which side they were on. That was about it. Middle class, tiny, blah. I think now we are looking, in every struggle that I've documented and have visited, including, you know, Istanbul, Greece, Spain, Morocco, China even, when it happens, you do see, big cities do have almost three tribes, and they are the urban poor, the organised workers, and the educated but precarious youth. Of course, they don't look that different to each other. These are some guys I met in Cairo from the Mukatam slum, the Coptic Christian slum, whose specialism is collecting garbage. And these are workers in Bolivia, miners on strike, who I met in 2006. And those are guys in Taksim Square, in one of the famous burnout buses. Don't ask me what he's doing with the flowers. He stood there for hours with those. I mean, are you here, man with flowers? I want to know what you were doing, but it looked so beautiful that in the end, loads of people started taking his photograph. They are what I call the educated but precarious youth. Their lives are not that different, and in that is where the unity and ability to unite comes from. But their spontaneous forms of action are different. The spontaneous life and ways of thinking of these guys, what that clenched fist means. You can't see it, but off camera they've got dynamite as well. You know, these are incredibly solidaristic people. They live a life where religion and family can be more important, and where struggle takes place. They told me that on the day they went to Tahrir, they stood up and they said, because they have a little cross tattooed on their wrist, they stood up with the Muslim guys and said, you know, Christian, Muslim, one hand. It was very important for them, but they defined everything by their identity in that slum. These guys define everything. You can't see their helmets, but Che's on their helmets. For them, everything's politics. Everything's tradition and history for the Bolivian working class. And for the, I don't even know who they were, but I did see one of their great gestures in Gezi Park was drinking beer. And they loved drinking beer and holding hands with women, because it was just a great big middle finger to the government of the AK Party in terms of what they were supposed to be doing. This is the working class. You guys know where this is, yeah? Where is it? Okay, this is in the Mukatam slum in Cairo. And what they're doing is, the factory is in the street. And what they do is they get glass bottles and they shred them like this. You can see the health and safety is fantastic. All the rules are being followed. And the bags of shredded stuff go where? Where do you think they go? What happens to them? Well, they go to China, so that's a global supply chain. And that's what they make out of it. Everybody here is probably wearing some of that. So your nylon comes from them. That's the working class, as well as being slum dwellers. Those are the people, all of those guys, but they are just some of the people who went down to Tahrir Square at a certain point and said no more. You couldn't imagine a more menial and less militant looking bunch of people, and yet they did it. This is not a quote from anybody, it's a quote from me. This is what I think's happening. That the key contradiction in the world economically is between the possibility of loads more stuff that we have being free and abundant and or cheap and collaboratively produced, and the fact that we've got banks, governments, states, corporations who are now forced, in order to make that not happen, to sit on in an increasingly beleaguered pile of what? Debt, intellectual property, patents for drugs that should and could be free. That's the contradiction. Those of you who grew up in a Marxist world know that there are other contradictions. There are other ways of expressing the contradiction between capitalism and humanity. But to me, that is currently what the contradiction is. And in other words, everything comes down to a fight between the network and the hierarchy. And so what these revolts are, the ones that we saw in that film, have a meaning beyond the individual meaning that was in the minds of the people who did them. The meaning is that. The meaning is that at some point we're going to need a way of focusing all this energy to make a tipping point happen in history that is it's just there, it's pregnant. Because of the scale of change, because of the 500-year nature of the impact of networks on our minds, because of the tens of thousands of years impact when women are liberated. It's a massive thing. So don't shirk from the history. Don't shirk and start and cower in front of it. Embrace it. And that's not a bad slogan either. That's syntagma. Thank you. We're going to have some questions. So the point is, it's your turn. You're going to speak. Who wants to talk? So there's a microphone somewhere. The lights go up. Marianne, do you want to do this, or shall I just kind of? Yes, I can't even see there. There's a woman there. Excuse me, ma'am. There's a woman there.
Oh, you keep. I just want to remark. Maybe there is a little bit of positivism in your
there is.
In your lecture. That was a little bit disturbing me.
Okay.
Because there is another side to everything that feels positive in this lecture. Even work is not necessary, but then capitalism is doing something with it. It's putting us to work even we are not working, and then it's benefiting from it. Or technology, I mean, it's channeling people also. And I mean, there's a lot, but it's too fast now. I just wanted to kind of say the positive problem. Yeah.
I'm only chairing now. I'll chair it. Yeah, I'm not going to keep answering because I'll take your point. Somebody else.
Hi, thanks. I wonder, a number of people in Egypt and elsewhere have noted the linkage between some of the protests that began in the run-up to the war in Iraq in 2002-2003, and then the continuation of protests that led to Tahrir Square, particularly in Egypt, but I think perhaps in other places as well. I wonder if you see that sort of rise starting earlier, before the immediate outbreak of these global uprisings in 2010-2011. Do you see that history as a consistent one?
We have people from Egypt here, so maybe one of them would like to answer that. Where are they? Because down here. Somebody down here.
Thanks. I would like to say, this is a really good, maybe popular, storifying the last 3 years. I think, there are very, very much maybe contradictions, negative things in terms of networks or linking people, or maybe also collaborating with more horizontal or less horizontal groups and more hierarchical groups. So it's really important to talk about this, discuss about this here with the activists coming from different countries. So it can be really good to have like a networked or unhierarchical space to create. I would like to say we try to create, try to also communicate with Brandon and Marianne. We have this kind of space in the occupied squad, very near here for 4 minutes to walk. And they gave us this space to come together, like an assembly, a horizontal space, and invite everybody. I would like to continue, because it's really important to talk about it, maybe negative or this side of.
Did we find anybody from Egypt? No, but go on, yeah, but fire away, sir. Go on. I'll keep this.
I have a question.
Many.
Can I suggest something? Sorry, it's very weird with the microphone. I think people can hold the microphone.
Sorry, it's just the thing how we organize it here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry it bothers you, but I think this will work fine.
Having women carrying a microphone to bend on people to speak. I mean, I don't understand.
I can hold it. I'll give it back to you. I will give it back to you.
We are not in a TV show.
I like to hold it, please, so don't make it work.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so it seemed like you were very optimistic about these new information technologies, and at the very end you were being critical of people who were brought up in the Marxist framework. But to me, I see a lot of resemblance when you talk. It's almost this techno-fetishism of these new information technologies. People said the same thing about factories and the production line, many Marxist-Leninists. Now we see that that is much not very desired. So I'm curious if you see anything bad about these information technologies that you seem to hold up as the new thing that we can't stop and we must embrace.
I will answer that. Okay. Well, anything human can be bad, of course. But what? Of course, well, people said something good about factories. They brought a lot of people together under one roof, and they were supposed to be like de-skilled, de-classed, uneducated, but they turned out to be the first force in human history that could change the world. So when you stand on the foundation stones of the first ever factory in Derbyshire in England, it's a very humbling experience because you realise that the possibility of social justice started when they laid that foundation and put 300 women and 60 children in it. So factories to me had a positive and negative thing, but overall they've created a dynamic of struggle for 200 years. And now, of course, we still have factories. We have factories that fall on people's heads. We have factories that are virtual. We have a whole range of them. But the important thing to me is that what networks allow you to do, and we have some better experts than me in this audience about networks and network theory, but what a network allows you to do is to distribute and to produce to a certain extent without management. So, for example, the suite of things that we use to run web servers, I can't remember the acronym. It's the language, the server, somebody talk. Is it Apache? It's collaboratively produced and can be run collaboratively. You can do things without the need for management hierarchy. Now, to me, who as a student of economics and someone who lived through the last phase of hierarchical struggle, it's quite a big thing to see before your eyes a new kind of production. I don't believe it's a new mode of production. I think it challenges, as I said, it's a deep structural challenge both to the hierarchical nature of old capitalism and to how they are going to make money. Where do high-skilled jobs come from when labour is expelled from production by automation and robots? Where do markets go when lots of things are technically free? They're technically abundant. You could copy and paste forever certain things. So for me, it's the fascination of that. I am not saying that they solve the problem. Clearly, the problem is not solved from that film. The problem is only begun. How do you build a society based on network technology? But Castells, I interviewed Manuel Castells, the sociologist of these issues, and I think he put it really clearly. He said, it's like electrification. You can't go back. You don't de-electrify a village, and you can't de-network a society. But maybe that's controversial because I can see some people don't agree with that. Fire back at me. Just stick your hand up for now.
I appreciate some of the points about the use of technology. However, I think that technology is still far more of a tool than an actual game changer itself. But aside from that, I'd like to support a point that the comrade made about the overly optimistic nature of some of the views we've had recently about these uprisings, although I think overall they are good. In particular, the idea that the working poor the urban poor, rather, the working class, and the educated youth, in kind of a, are somehow have aligned ideas. So in the United States, in particular, and Occupy in particular, we have seen where these groups at one point look like they have several things in common, but then when we actually get down and get engaged in struggle, there's a huge split between them. So in particular, the area where we've been working, which is the foreclosure crisis, it seems like the urban poor has wanted one thing, which is the human right to housing. The working class has wanted some version of the human right to housing. And the educated youth has wanted the ability to maintain home ownership at cheap mortgage rates. These are vastly different, even opposing views. And I think while we all seem to be on one side of the street at one point, I think the divide between those two areas is great, and we have to figure out how to solve that in a real way. And this isn't the only place it's happened, but I think there's been some romanticism about the extent to which educated, in which case here educated can be used in quote as really middle-class youth who just haven't had their job yet, somehow have a complete alignment with the working poor and the urban poor, which I don't think that has happened.
I'd take that point. Sir. Back.
I actually just kind of want to follow up on his point, which he almost made it for me, but I wanted to touch on the capacity of networks to overcome those sort of things. I mean, I like how you laid out those three categories of kind of like subjects within sort of this cycle of struggles and their key role. I'm not as optimistic about the capacity of networks to overcome those differences, because all a network can do is put people in contact with one another. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to collaborate. If they feel that their interests are competing, if their political grammars are competing, if their very own understanding of their interests are competing, then it's entirely possible that a network can close off groups. It can introduce people to other groups that share similar kind of affective, configurations or whatever, similar affinities. But it may also close things off. I mean, it doesn't magically kind of like lead towards collaborative sort of collective production.
Can I throw a comment in here? Because I appreciate I take your point there. Because what I'm trying to say there is that wasn't solved in the old era either. In other words, absolutely, there are different ways of thinking, different dynamics of people's lives. What you're saying effectively, there are different material interests. That's true. But the beauty of the network is simply this: if you've ever been in a Leninist party, you know what those interests, or even a trade union, you know what those interests do. Because I was once a member of the Labour Party Young Socialists. Okay, it was this run by an ostensibly Trotskyist group, whose version of Trotskyism basically revolved around the idea that the workers could never change from this caricature that we say about them. They have a certain way of thinking. Now, when it came to the simple question of the gay age of consent in Britain, which was 21 when it was 16 for heterosexuals, the argument of the people who ran this group was that if we raise this, then, given that the workers are the key to the revolution, we're going to piss them off. Okay? So when you gave out a leaflet saying, please reduce the gay age of consent to the same as heterosexuals, those leaflets were torn out of your hand and thrown on the floor. At least now with networks, if we don't like it, there's a kind of space not to have the tearing up going on. And I think that what it allows us to do is to negotiate those problems better than at the time when everything, the hierarchy was all. And I put it this way, a lot of my generation's political activity was focused on the labour movement. And actually it could have equally been said the same was true for the civil rights movement in the USA. And it was saying, we've got to get this movement to do stuff. We're like a big lever, and the boulder is here. We've got to make that boulder roll. In the age of networks, the more sensible thing is to be a little stone and start rolling. There's no need to do the levering. The levering becomes kind of not pointless, but not the main thing. So to me, who's lived through it, and those others of us in this room, I think, who have lived through it, that is the obvious thing. It doesn't solve the problem, though. Does anybody else want to say anything about any of this?
Then the people
microphone is
for the live streaming
controversial.
can't hear it. That's why we need a microphone.
It is being live streamed, so that's why they want to mic people. Yeah.
I was wondering, because I'm not yet really a very active activist, but I have done a lot of study and done as much action as I can myself alone, and I work a lot on the internet. But I realized that in social media, I'm still very scared, in a way, that there is still quite a kind of invisible, unjudgeable oppression or how do you say it, control on the internet, and there are several examples of people who have been literally put in jail because they've expressed their information and knowledge and shared it with other people in social networks. And I was wondering whether there's people in the room who have information about that and who know whether this movement, kind of global movement, is stronger than grows more rapid than the movement of virtual oppression by authorities.
Yes, I want to go on 2 points. First thing is that the whole debate on this network, social media, and stuff. I think you're right in mainly things that you're saying. For me, but the most important, the most impressive thing was not only the new revolution of the way of we are communicating in a horizontal way. That's absolute d'accord, and that's a change that is not going to be back. That will change all social relations and also movements and also how we build a new society. But social networks bring also a new way of building the identity of rebellious subjectivity, of rebellion. If you look at the experience of Egypt revolution, the Facebook page of We Are All Khaled Said, this was a kind of amplifying the grievance, the unsatisfaction of the people, building a common identity for the rebellion on a base of horizontal amplifying. But and I'm d'accord with most of things you say, but we should be, as a friend said, we should be careful of economics of a technological determinism. Yeah. Revolts are based on changes that happen in the base of society, but revolts need more than that. And I want to go on a second point. That is, we can talk a lot about description of how and why and sociological categories and so. But for me it's interesting in this weekend also to talk how we can win this global uprising. Not only to describe it, but to see what problems do we have. And if we look at these experiences of this revolt, I think one main problem is that revolts and uprisings bring chaos. And chaos is a good thing to bring down an unjust order. But if we don't solve this problem of somehow building up a new alternative, building up a new order, the mass of society can also be tired of this chaos and be affected by reactionary answers and be affected by maintained authorities like we see in Egypt at the moment with the army. So let's talk about experiences, how a new order also is built up out of these collective experiences we have.
Agreed. I think there's one person up there, there's two people up there in fact, but I think what the idea is after that, we're going to wrap it up simply because there's an entire conference ahead of us and people keep having to move.
Can I just shortly comment on the networks?
Yeah.
Because I come from activism in the 80s, where one of the very important things is if you want to make new structures, if you want to win a fight, you have to own your own media. And that's something that is very fundamental to be able to formulate between each other what you want to do. And currently most networks are owned by the parties you fight. That's why there are great controlling mechanisms also now. So the fantastic time of having networks as great communal space, yes, it's a bit like that, but it's really losing ground like that. And unless there are new media that you can own in which you can, in trustworthy ways, exchange your information, I think it's you'll miss the point of winning the control and the power.
Actually, mine will be just a small reflection, which is we had social media before social media, which are songs and films. So we shouldn't miss out the role of the songs and films and art in all these global uprisings. Last one here?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I fully agree about the new paradigm that the technologies mean in terms of horizontal processes and horizontal capabilities for organization. And what we have to remember also is that the network is created by nodes, and it's true that it's not possible that one node controls all the network, but some nodes are more powerful than others. And this creates new power structures that we have to deal with. Because everybody can open a Twitter account, but the Twitter account of Occupy Wall Street, for instance, has a specific impact that is much bigger than many others. And in relation to what the colleague said about how victory can look like, I would like to mention that there is another process that is very important that is happening, which is the end of Western supremacy in the world. And this has strong implications in many different ways, because movements, social movements that are taking place in the core capitalist countries, like in Europe and the United States, they have a complete different battle than those movements that are acting in the periphery of the capitalist system.
But before we stop, thank you, because I'm being signalled to stop by people who are organising, because we... Go on, yeah, well, I can, but I just need to tell who is it. Go on. Well, you decide then. I'll carry on.
I just wanted to give one critical comment on networks. I mean, capitalism is definitely a network, not only in its form of production, but in its ideological justification in the last 30 years. And I think this fetish of the network is a conjuncture between a certain anarchist naivete and the neoliberal politics of the last 30 years that really reinforces the network as a form of freedom, which is completely compatible with modern capitalism. So I don't understand what's revolutionary about networks at all.
Perhaps that it sounds good.
Perhaps that is not a bad note to end. Is that? Do you want to respond?
Well, no, because I'm here tomorrow, I want to rattle on, but let me just defend my Let me just defend my positivism.
Yeah.
Let me say why. Because I think, right, remember, I work for the mainstream media. The mainstream media is not the worst part of the system. The worst part of the system are the people who sell cheap clothes and let factories fall on people's heads. That's the worst part of the system. Also, governments who allow the Syrian revolution to be killed en masse because it's a revolution. That's the worst, but quite a bad part of the system was a media that could tell you, that was the gatekeeper to the truth. I sit in rooms full of 50-year-old men who've seen their world collapse because they can no longer command the status and they can no longer even be the powerful node on the network. They are a node on the network. It says on their business card, economics editor, Newsnight, BBC, but anarchist, polyamorous woman with pink hair has more Twitter followers than me because she writes more interesting things. I'm good friends with Laurie Penny. I'm talking about Laurie, and it's Laurie is high in the network in the UK movement. I am low, so that's and complete down the line straight neoliberal ideologues are nowhere. Yeah, my positivity arises because I have seen happen in the space of 10 years. First, the dissolution of the influence of those hierarchical dissemination mechanisms, and then something happened that I kind of wished would happen, which is what you saw in film number 1. That, to me, they are linked, even if they're only loosely linked. And you're writing the first draft of history, so you can't say how they're linked. They're linked. The final thing will be, of course, your points about who controls the network. I think it's becoming clear to me. I often wondered how the neoliberal era would finally end, and I often thought it would take the form, and it may even do that, of competitive exits from globalization. So you devalue your currency, you put a trade block against some other countries. I often worried about that. After the NSA revelations, after WikiLeaks, and you know very well about this, that the danger is actually the other way. It is that they retreat from the internet. That societies that cannot stand freedom have to close the internet down. And that is what we're basically, look at what Germany's done in response to the NSA. Look at what the NSA effectively has done to Google. There are big existential crises facing the biggest intelligence agency in the world and the biggest tech company in the world because of what they've done. So, it may not last forever. It may be that the whole thing was a kind of Weimar Republic of the mind, and it gets replaced by something quite horrible. But while we're in it, it's decent. It's good. I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and we certainly seem to have a lot of material for discussion for the coming days. So, tomorrow morning we open again with the first panel at 10 o'clock in this room. Thank you.
And tomorrow will be a little bit of a different format. This is kind of a more standard issue plenary, but there'll be 3 rooms. There'll be 1 plenary in this room, and then there'll be 3 rooms, including the film room. And then there'll be 2 rooms, and then there'll be another plenary in the evening. But also, just to let people know, there is a D4 space, there is other places where people can actually meet in kind of a different format than the sort of conference freak show that's happening in Debali. So take advantage of all the spaces, and thanks for coming out.